Good morning. Good afternoon. Good evening, wherever you may be on earth. This is Musa, Matt Mitchum Jr., broadcasting from Nairobi, Kenya. I have a lot of things on my mind, and I would like to talk about a lot of things. But I think the most relevant, the most significant thing to talk about, because of the research that I'm doing, is the concept of infinity. Infinitive, Infinitive. I think that's the way you spell that word. Infinitive, or infinite, or everlasting. And if you have been following me in my discussions and in my research on the formula E equal mc squared, you would know that I have already spoken about infinitive. But the more I think about that concept, the more and more that I am intrigued. One of my discoveries, I'm sure scientists already knew about it, but one of my personal discoveries in dealing with the equation E equal mc squared, and then coming upon the concept of infinity, I was extremely intrigued, excited when I realized that infinitive is relative. It's like a paradox or like a contradiction. And I would like to pursue another discussion on the concept, the idea of infinitive. To make it easy for myself, let me say that infinitive is everlasting. Why? Because it's easier for me to say everlasting than to say infinitive. But when we think of the concept of everlasting and infinitive, we're talking about something that does not have an end. We're talking about something that's continuous. And the more and more you think about it, the more and more you may be concerned. Infinitive. Let me just deal with issues of infinitive. If we think of the atoms that exist within our own bodies, I mean, from our head to our toe, I think we're talking about an infinite amount of things. When we think about the universe, and this is the most intense, the universe and the universes, the universe of which we live in, and the other universes that exist, we're talking about infinity. I'm sure if you have been paying attention to my broadcast, you may remember when I put my fingers up like this once. And let's imagine that the point from here to here is an inch, like on a ruler. And let's say that we were gifted enough to develop an instrument that could slice minute things. And if this instrument, which we invented, can slice minute things. Then when it begins to slice, let's say there was a solid between this point and this point. There's a solid medium, like a piece of wood, concrete or whatever. But between this point and this point is solid matter. And we have an instrument, and we get this instrument, this very refined instrument, this instrument that can cut through minute parts. And we can start here at this point and continue. And this instrument can get smaller and smaller. Each cut, let's look at it this way. Each time this instrument cuts, it gets smaller because it's getting ready to cut again. So we take the instrument and we cut. And every time it cuts, it gets smaller. So that it can continue to cut. But every cut that it cuts, the smaller the blade is. And these are the 2 points. This is one point, and this is the other point. And when we get this instrument and we cut and continue to cut this solid matter, and every time that we cut, the instrument gets the blade of the instrument gets smaller from each cut. Every time I make a cut, the blade gets smaller, which means it has to continue to cut, continues to cut. If the blade of the instrument continued to get smaller each time it cut the solid matter, the instrument would never, okay, here's the inch of solid matter. And then we have an instrument. As it cuts each part of the solid matter, the blade of the instrument gets smaller and smaller and smaller as it continues to cut on the solid matter. The blade that's doing the cutting will never reach this point. That's infinitive. Infinitive is the concept that has no ending. There is no ending. But see, the paradox about this is that when we look at the space between here and here, and as the human eye perceives it, we see a limit. We see a beginning and we see an end. But even though we see with our own eyes a beginning and an end, the space between this point and this point is infinite. We will never reach this point, though we perceive it with our eyes. We perceive a beginning and we perceive an end. But the space between this point and this point is infinite as we measure it. Now let's look at the universe. Let's go far, 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 far out into the universe. far, 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 far out into space, way, 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 way up there, and continue to travel. We say the end of time or the edge of time, but there is no end of time. There is no edge of time because time continues to flow. It never stops. Time. It flows. Time. It flows continuously and it never stops. Now we know time, we can accept the premise that time, there's no such thing as the end of time. Though we say it, time never stops. Okay. Now, let's say that everything is relative. Now, if we say that everything is relative, then that means that since time is a thing, that it is relative. Whoa, those are the things that I consider. The idea of there not being an end to anything, that everything always exists. That's something that was something that I was thinking about. This whole concept of never ending, this whole concept of relativity, and this reality that infinitive is relative. The space between those 2 points is infinite. The space between this point and this point is infinite. Of course, depending on how we perceive it, who's perceiving it, and what instruments we have to cut this part of space. If we can, if the instrument, we can, if we can design an infinite, an infinitesimal instrument that can cut to the smallest parts that exist, to the smallest parts that exist, then the instrument will never, the instrument from this point to this point, and the instrument is cutting, it will never reach this point. Same thing as we perceive it. This space, is this space equal to this space? So we say no, but the space between this point, and this point is infinite. And the space between this point and this point is infinite. Infinitive is relative. So if we say that infinitive is relative, and since infinitive is some way related to everything, Everything is related to infinity. If everything and infinity are related, that means that existence never expires. And what is existence? Existence is the idea of. Existence is the concept of. Let's talk about God. I love to talk about God. And if you talk about God and you continue to talk about God, it gets scary. I'll show you. God is the creator of everything. God is the most powerful. God knows everything. God knows everything. God knows the moment that each of us will expire. God knows everything. God knows the future and the present. I cannot get this man off of my mind. Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler did some cruel things. Well, there was another guy, Leopold of the Belgian Congo. But in the recent history, as I understand history, as I know history, the worst things that you could do to humanity, Adolf Hitler did it. God knew that Adolf Hitler would do those terrible things to other aspects of humanity. God knows everything, right? He knows the past. He knows the future. Even before we think it, he knows the future. God knew 1,000,000 years ago that that child would be raped and cannibalized. Think of the worst things here. Think of the worst things that can happen to a human entity. Did God know that this thing would happen? God knows everything. God knows the rapist. He knows the murderer. He knows the mass killer. He knows the pedophile. What is it that God does not know? He knows everything. He knows the past and he knows the future. Think of the worst things that could happen to a human being or human society or a human population. Think of the worst things. A bear taking, here's a child walking through the bush or walking through the woods, and a bear, a human being, a human child walking, and the bear chases the child down and tears the child apart and then devours the child. Or a man chasing a baby, 5-year-old baby. down in the woods, and he catches the child, strangles the child, cuts the child open, pulls out the child's intestines, and he eats them. Think of the worst things that could happen to any of us. Didn't God know that these things would happen? I fear God. I love God. But let's look at this. Let's look how it gets. Look how this whole frame of reference. Where does it lead us? God is a good God. God is a mighty God. God is a great God. Yet every minute, every infinitesimal action that exists in the universe or the universes didn't and don't God know those things? See, so we begin to think about God. It gets very scary. God created the fear within us. I know in Christian theology, and I think also in Quranic theology, it says fear God. Fear God. It says love God, love and fear God. I think in both of those theological persuasions, Islam and Christianity, somewhere when you open up their books, the Quran or the Bible, somewhere you're going to see fear God and love God. And that's all that we as human beings can and should do, love God and fear God. Because He's the maker of the universes, He's the maker of everything. So, what does that have to do with infinity? What does that have to do with infinity? The infinite universes, where you go out into space and you travel and you travel, you travel. And there's no ending, never stopping, continuously, everlasting. So we sit, we sit and we philosophize and we think and we contemplate. But the more we think and the more we contemplate, we either become better or we become worse. Let's look at the rapist. Let's look at the child molester. Let's look at the worst type of human being that has no regard for humanity. What causes that to happen within this infinite universe? And yet, we always are seeking solutions. Oh, here's a man with two heads. Here's a child with a head like a football. Here's a human being with two sex organs. Here's one with four sex organs. Here's one with feet growing out of his abdomen. God has his reasons, and we will never understand as we exist as we are in the flesh. Infinitive, everlasting, God. Those are some very serious concepts to consider. So I go on a crusade, my crusade, to save humanity, to save humanity. I go on a crusade searching for a formula to save humanity. It's already, it is it is already written as to what will be done and what shall be done and what is to be done. The infinite, the everlasting God, who we should fear and love. God, the most powerful thing, the most powerful entity of all the universes. He does as he pleases with his creation. Who is God? What is God? Where is God? How is God? When is God? This is Musa, Matt Mitchell Jr., signing off in Nairobi, Kenya.